It's taken Liverpool Council nearly 2 decades to realise what Merseyfolk have known all along. The Beatles were the finest ambassadors the city ever had. So this afternoon the fans gathered and the city fathers rolled out the carpet to bestow on Paul McCartney Liverpool's most cherished honour, the freedom of the city. If those outside were too young to remember Beatlemania, then those inside the city's Picton Library had years and memories to spare. Watched by wife Linda, the council's chairman handed over the scroll to the former Beatle, who told the assembly, "I'm chuffed."
Paul, your immense contribution to pop music over the past 20 years has been recognised in many ways, but how does the recent acknowledgement by the City of Liverpool authorities in making you a Freeman compare with those?
It's strange at first because these old traditions, you know, like freemanships and stuff, you don't really know what they mean in a modern society, you know, so strange because you're getting a symbolic thing. If you want to look at it cynically, you can say, what did they give me, you know? But I just took it that I sort of pretended that the people of Liverpool were giving me the honour. And that way, it means certainly as much as any honour I've ever had. And, you know, if you really think it was the people giving me it, then it is a great honour, because that's sort of who I'm doing it for, really, besides myself. It's people, you know, rather than authorities.
In looking back over that fairly lengthy career of yours, when was the moment when you sort of first discovered that you had a talent for songwriting?
When I was about 14, my dad bought me a trumpet for my birthday, and I tried to play that, because that was the hip instrument in those days. It was the Man with the Golden Arm, and Eddie Calvert and all that. And I tried to play it, but couldn't do that too well, so I swapped it for a guitar, which then I swapped that round left-handed. And when I was 14, that was when I wrote my first song. I didn't discover I had a talent for it, though, because, you know, it wasn't a very talented song. And then I hooked up with John, and we wrote a few songs together that still weren't very good. So I suppose when I first thought I had a talent for it was then, but the first time it was proved we had a talent for it was when Love Me Do was accepted for a Beatles record. Then that was like official acceptance.
Job, or were you doing it just for fun?
It's a difficult question, really, because we knew we were different. We knew we could see what everyone else was doing. And most people were copies of other groups. There were a lot of Cliff Richards and the Shadows groups. Most groups were Cliff or the Shadows. Then there was a lot of Roy Orbison groups, actually. There were a lot of groups like that that aped one of the famous stars. And we didn't. We were kind of just all in black turtlenecks and little leather jackets and stuff, looking bit weird maybe, a bit longer hair than everyone. And we were coming more out of the like bohemian tradition, you know, more in sympathy with like American R&B than any British acts, and more in sympathy with people like Juliet Greco and Edith Piaf, you know, or you know, we felt like identified with that whole tradition more. So, yeah, we sort of knew we had something. We couldn't put our finger on it, but there was always something that made us think, you know, we've got to stick with this, because this is something special. And if we'd had problems, you know, somebody would kind of say, what are we going to do now? We used to say, well, something will happen. And there was always a faith, you know, just that we could do something. And so we started off in Hamburg, and from nothing in Hamburg, we used to play in a little club called the Indra, down the Grosse Freiheit, which is, you know, kind of an off street. It's not the big main street down there, in a roughish area. We used to play down there, and at first we had no audience. But after about a month, we had an audience. So we knew we could pull people. You know, we could just see that. And we moved to another club, no audience. Then after about 2 or 3 weeks, big audience. So we knew in Hamburg, by the time we got back to England, we knew we could do it. In England, nobody knew we could do it. So we always had this little bit more faith in ourselves than anybody else did.
So it was something that you had to work quite hard at in the early days?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When the Beatles split, you had a choice facing you. Did you want to go solo or form another band?
Well, when the Beatles split, I didn't really want to do anything, because it was pretty painful. Suddenly, friends that you'd known for years were like turning on you. And, you know, it's like a messy divorce. It's not pleasant. So it's very difficult to kind of do anything. But I just thought, well, if I don't do anything, I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter. If I don't keep it up, maybe I'm going to forget how to do it. I mean, an athlete, if he stops athletics for a year, it's going to make a big difference. So really all I wanted was just something to practice with. I wanted anything, so that I could have a sing per day, you know, just so that I'd keep doing it, so that I didn't get out of practice. Because if I ever did get out of practice, I went up to Scotland once or twice and just buried myself up there, you know, just in heather. But it didn't work because I found I was getting rusty. If I try and write a song, I'd forgotten a bit how to do it, and I didn't want to do that. So I decided to keep in practice one way or another. So that really meant forming a new group. So I just said to Linda, you know, should we form a group? It was done very casually. She said, yeah, you know, maybe, if you like. And it was done that casually. And we got hold of a few friends, and we formed Wings. And that was the reason, really, just so that I wouldn't just have to give up. It was really something else to do after the Beatles. And then that, over the years, kind of got its own following. At first, you know, I thought, well, there's no chance with this, but I'll do it anyway. But it started to get its own following, you know. And I mean, it got crazy towards the end of Wings. You were finding young kids being born who were saying to their parents, is it true Paul McCartney was in a group before Wings? That's really true, you know. I mean, it sounds like a joke to us older folk, but there really are, you know, that started to happen. So, you know, it's quite a good thing in the end.
You mentioned that you were looking around for a group and you were looking to write more songs. Was it a question of you maybe losing a bit of self-confidence at the end of the Beatles split? And
a bit? A lot.
Really?
Yeah, very much, yeah. Well, you know, I always say, like, it was as if on the Monday you had one of the best jobs in the music world. Definitely, it's nothing much higher than being in the Beatles. Yeah? And on the Tuesday, you were out of work. You didn't have it anymore, and you'd come this 10 years and known fame and known success. Suddenly you didn't have it, you know. And it brought on a feeling that I've heard a lot of unemployed people mention, which is a kind of feeling of uselessness. You feel suddenly you're not worth anything, you know. And people will say, but you can write songs, you know, you've got some money left, it's all right, you know, don't panic. No, you know, to me it was like I lost my role. It's identity crisis, I suppose someone would call it. But it was that, really, and it was very difficult for a while, because on top of that, there was also, like, the business stuff, which was making it very difficult, you know, having to sue people. So it was heavy times, it was not pleasant at all. But one good thing is at least they finish, and then you see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
So you had a great period of enjoyment and creativity with Wings, and then after that you worked on 2 solo albums, Tug of War and Pipes of Peace. Now what was the thinking behind those?
Well, after Wings, I thought that, I realized that in some ways a group situation is limiting. If you're working with the same group of people all the time in music, if, for instance, you write a song that needs a piano solo that's got to sound very New Orleans, a real old jazzy New Orleans sounding blues, and your pianist in the group can't do that, you've got to knock that idea out. If you're after a Spanish guitar solo that is impeccably played and your guitar player can't play like that, you're finished. So that's what's wrong with groups, you know. You've got to have a very definite direction, like, say, the Stones, which is all blues. They're just, everything's just blues or C and W. Pretty much, anything they do. So that there's never that conflict, you know. They're always, the guitar player, Keith or Ronnie, are being asked to play something that's familiar to them. In my kind of music, I might throw an oddball solo at a guitar player because it's a bit more wider work. And So that became limiting for the group. And so I was going to work with George Martin as my producer, and he said, why don't we do a solo thing, and why don't we just use any musicians that we want, and why don't we cast it like a film? If this song needs the Royal Philharmonic, why don't we get them? So that was the idea behind that, and I worked that way with George even up until the new album, till this film.
All around the world, little children being born to the world. Got to give them all we can till the war is won. Then will the work be done? Help them to learn songs of joy instead of burn, baby, burn. Let us show them how to play the fight for peace. Play the fight for peace. Help me to learn songs of joy instead of burn, baby, burn. Won't you show me how to play the fight for peace? Play the fight for peace.
During this period, you worked with several other stars, people like Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson. Why did you choose them?
Well, I really just, after the group, I just wanted to work with people I admired. It's really all it is, you know. That's what everyone wants to do, really. If you're an interviewer, you want to interview the people who kind of interest you and you've been thinking about, you know. It's a hot interview, you can do that. Instead of just twiddling around with people who are boring, you know. And it just came to me that, like, I've loved, this, you know, Stevie Wonder's music is hot stuff. And I'm a big admirer of his. And similarly, Michael, you know, I love his voice and his dancing. So I originally asked Stevie to do Ebony and Ivory, and I beat him into it, beat him into submission.
What was his reaction, though? I mean, did you just ring him up on the phone or what?
Yeah, I rang him up. I said, I've got a song that I'd like to do with you. It's called Ebony and Ivory. I'd like to do it with a black and a white guy. And you're my choice for the black guy. If I can have anyone, I'll have you. I may not be able to get you, or the worst you can do is tell me no. So he said, well, send me the song. So I sent him a demo of it, and he liked it, and he thought we could do it. He saw what I was getting at. And he came down to Montserrat. He nearly didn't come down. Last minute, somebody got me on the phone and said, he's not coming. So I said, hi, Stevie, you're not coming? And he said, oh, I got a lot of work. And I said, come on. I said, you need a holiday. It's sunny down here. You've got to come. So in the end, he said, oh, okay. He came down for a week. And it was great, because I do admire him a lot as a musician. And you've got to keep on your toes to stay in the same room as a man like that. You've really got to think of it. You can't just laze around, you know, he's so good. And Michael, was a different thing happened. He rang me, I think after he'd known that I'd worked with Stevie and stuff. It may have prompted him. Well, he rang me on Christmas Day, and he said, I want to make some hits. So I thought, anyone that positive, I'm not going to turn down, you know. So I said, well, he said, I want to come over to England. I said, well, what for? You know, what do you want to do? And he said, make hits, you know. So I said, great. So we come up here, one floor up, and we just sat around, plonked the guitar, I plonked the guitar, and we wrote a couple of songs together. And then we did some work, recorded them together, and I did one for his album, Thriller. And then we did Say, Say, Say video together, which was great to do. That was really good to do, because he's a great fella, Michael. He's very shy, and a lot of people, you know, when you get that famous, you get the media on your back and say it's the new Black Howard Hughes, or, you know, whatever they want to do to catch a headline. You know, they call you anything if it looks good, and a headline. So you get this image growing up around him now, you know, kind of. But he is very shy. He's not at ease in public. But he's a hell of a singer, a hell of a writer, and when you know him, he's a nice fella.
Another bunch of people you admire are the Everly Brothers, or at least two people, hardly a bunch.
Half a bunch.
Half a bunch, indeed. You wrote their last hit, didn't you? How did that come about?
Dave Edmunds, who's in the film Give My Card to Broad Street, that we just made. Plug. Dave
We'll
Edmunds.
be talking about
we're
that
gonna
later, don't we?
Dave Edmunds said to me that the Everleys had asked him to produce a record, and he said he was just ringing around a lot of people, asking them if they wanted to contribute in writing. So I said, yeah, please, you know, because they were one of the very first acts that influenced people like me, along with Elvis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry. The Everleys were a very special thing. I think it's where the Beatles got the two people in harmony thing. John and I were the Everleys, really, when we started up. A lot of people, most people when they start up, I think they imitate someone. And we did. And one of our imitations really was the Everleys. So when I got asked to write a song, it was a privilege and an honour.
You must have been quite chuffed that they decided to team up again as well.
Yeah, I was. They'd had a lot of problems, you know, brothers. Sometimes it's a difficult situation. I know, I've got a brother, you know, and you can argue. You know, it's a strange thing, really. Because you don't want to argue, but you find yourself in conflicted situations. So I was glad to hear that they were getting back together. I think a lot of people in my generation always wanted the Everleys to get back together. You know, it was always something we wanted. I suppose later generations always wanted the Beatles to get back together. It would have been that kind of dream for us to get the Everleys back. So when we knew they were going to do it, and Dave asked me, I jumped at the chance. I said, give me a week, see if I can come up with anything, you know. And I said, because I didn't want to come up with something that I thought was wrong. So I just, in that week, I came up with On the Wings of a Nightingale. And then I liked it, and the Everleys liked it. That was the main thing. It sounded just like an Everly Brothers record.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah.
Another name that's synonymous with yours, Paul, is Buddy Holly. How did this fascination with the man come about?
Well, the real reason is that as kids, you know, and I was mentioning Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Buddy and the Everleys were two very kind of accessible acts. Buddy was, the real reason Buddy was so popular around by us was he had glasses. I mean, he sang great and everything, but the thing that made him special was the glasses. So that any kid who had glasses, of which there's millions of them around, could be a rock star, suddenly. Till then, you couldn't be. If you had glasses, you just couldn't go singing rock and roll, I'm afraid. You know, you just couldn't, you wouldn't be accepted. But when Buddy came on, like, so John had big horn-rimmed glasses, because John always had very bad eyesight. Blind as a bat, he was. But he was, you know. But so he had these big horn-rimmed glasses. So he was Buddy, as well as being half the Everleys. He took his glasses off to be Dom of the Everleys, and then he put them back on to be Buddy.
Kept walking into the mic.
Yeah. So that Buddy was a big influence. Like he's like the boy next door. So everyone could identify with him. And anyone could then pick up a guitar, you know, and it gave a lot of people hope. So he was one of our really big influences.
All my life I've been waiting. Tonight there'll be no hesitating, no boy. Oh boy, when you're the old boy. Oh boy, the whole world can see that you are worth it for me. Stars appear and
later on, as I got into business a bit, what happens is your advisors kind of say to you, you'll have to invest your money. And me being a bit innocent about all that from Liverpool, I said, well, we won't invest it, put it in the bank, leave it, you know, there's no need to touch it. They said, no, you know, they start explaining all these reasons, the government will tax it or whatever it is, I don't know. Still don't understand it really. It turns out you've got to do something with your money, you've got to invest it, keep it moving around. So I said, well, if I have to invest, it should be music then, something I love. And my advisor said, well, who do you love? And I said, well, Buddy Holly, and we told him all those people. And Buddy Holly's catalogue, song publishing catalogue, came up for sale in America. So my company in America bought it. So that's the other interest in Buddy. is that for America, for business reasons, it kind of is also good to keep his memory alive. For me, it's not really the business reasons. It's just because I'm a fan, actually. I just love his music, always will do. But it does happen to also fit with the business thing. And what's nice there is I'll get a letter from someone like Maria Elena, who's Buddy's widow, saying, you know, thanks for what you're doing with him and stuff. And it makes it all worthwhile. Isn't it?
I know a major part of the last exhibition, Buddy Holly exhibition, was an art competition that you held. Just tell me a bit about that. I was quite intrigued when I heard about it.
Well, every year, even though our publishing company in America is the one that has Buddies, we don't have his rights in England. But just because we're fans, we have a Buddy Holly week here every year. So we do something to celebrate Buddy Holly's birthday for the week of September 7th, 14. And we always do something. So we had the crickets playing one year. I got up one year, just had to sing and that. And this year's idea was to have a painting competition so that anyone could do an image of Buddy. So it was nice because it got people drawing and painting and creating stuff. And it meant some people, there was a kid from Northern Ireland who won. So it's nice, you can do, it helps people, you know, in a little indirect way. It's a little creative buzz, and I always love that because I get off on that creation. I mean, the fellow who won it was, I think he was 76 years old. He's an old fellow who won it. And he was great. He did a lovely picture. But it brings people together, and it's a nice excuse, Buddy, to have those kind of things, really. It's good to have an excuse, you know, to have fun.
Talking of artwork, Paul, you in fact enjoy drawing quite a bit yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about it.
Well, I've always done it since I was a kid. I think it started with the comics that used to get us. I noticed my son does the same thing that I used to do. You get the comics as a kid and you see the cartoon characters, you know, Laurel and Hardy or somebody. And I used to learn how to draw them, you know. Certain little characters that if you could draw them at school, your friends would go, oh, you know, it was that kind of thing. And I always used to love to do it. So I became the class artist in a way, you know. I was the one in the school. If the boys would say, do us a drawing of a girl. You know, he was just like the resident artist. So I was never really very good, and I never trained for it at all. But I always liked it, always enjoyed it a lot. I always wanted to go to art college and stuff, but I could never do that. Never got in. So I was always just interested, and more recently, I'm at an age now where I'm not as sort of frightened by pressures against things. I know a lot of people won't draw. First thing a lot of people will say, you say, do us a drawing, say, oh, I can't draw. You know, and they block it out. They're never going to draw for the rest of their lives just because they say, I can't draw. So I got over all of that, and I thought, well, maybe my drawing isn't Picasso, but I like it. And there were a couple of other people who liked it. So I draw a little bit and paint a little bit. Not quite Rembrandt standard yet, but working on it.
Which brings me on to this book, Paul McCartney, composer and artist. And in fact, it is a collection of your songs and drawings. One thing that particularly interested me in this was Eleanor Rigby. How did you come to do the drawing for that?
Well, in truth, these drawings weren't done to go with the songs. What the people who published in the book said to me, they said, what was it? They asked me to do 40 drawings, and then they put them with the songs. And I said, are the drawings to illustrate the songs? They said, no, it's just to decorate, or whatever that means. In other words, it's not supposed to actually say anything relevant about the song.
But are you ever tempted maybe to visualise the songs on canvas or on paper or whatever?
No. I think it's a very difficult thing to do that. Is because, I'll tell you why, I think that when a person listens to a record, everyone gets their own picture. You know, two people listening to Sgt. Pepper, Lonely Hearts in particular, I think a very visual album. Two people listening will get completely different pictures. That's why I think when they tried to make the film of that, they had a lot of trouble. Because what goes on in your mind is much better than you can get in a film. You try and actually show those elephants rampaging, and then the hunt comes through, and then the chickens start going off. In your head, it's all plausible, like a dream. You actually show that on the screen, it looks a bit daft. Or two different people, somebody will say, that's not what I saw at all. Mine were hippopotamus, and it wasn't chickens at all, it was ducks. You know, so it's a very strange area to interpret a film, sorry, a song or a poem something that actually you interpret it yourself in your brain. I think it's very difficult to bring that onto a canvas, to bring the visual out.
Was it your love of drawing and animation that led to the cartoon of Rupert and the Frog Song?
Yeah, it was a lot of that. I've always loved cartoons. They've got a special, it's like a luxury item, cartoon. If ever there's one on television, you know, my eye is drawn to it, all my kids are drawn to it, Linda's very into it. And it's like a magic world. I like it because you can do anything in cartoons. You know, Tom and Jerry, and they bash into each other, and he's fried up by an electric bolt, and in the next scene, he's fine again. You know, and it's just this kind of freedom. There's a lot of freedom in that. And I was reading my daughter, who's now 21. She was 5 at the time. I was reading a Rupert story for a bedtime story. And Rupert went, you know, and I got into it. So, Rupert? And I was really interested, you know, and I started to think it would make a great Walt Disney feature. And that's what my big ambition is, to do, like a feature as good as Disney's. I don't think anyone's done it since Disney. I can't think, not even, I think Yellow Submarine was good in its way, but I still don't think it was as good as the Disney animation. So that'd be, I'd like to do this as well as it. And the one that goes out with Broad Street is a short, which was to see if we could do it at all, because I didn't want to do the big feature and then fail. And I think there's enough in this short to show us that we should do the feature.
You must be very happy that your new film, Give My Regards to Broad Street, is #1 in the box office ratings here in London, because let's be fair, the US critics gave you a bit of a rough ride, didn't they?
Yes. What happens with me is that, like, if I have a bad criticism, that's what the press mention, because it's a better story with me. It's not a very good story if they say, oh, Paul McCartney had some very good reviews and some very bad reviews. It doesn't make a good story. So if they say, Paul McCartney's been slammed by the critics, now you're getting somewhere. It's a much better story, although it's not true. But that's not the emphasis anyway of a lot of newspapers these days. Truth is becoming slightly secondary, I think, it always was. But anyway, so what happened actually in America was that, like, Variety gave it a bad review, The Hollywood Reporter gave it a great review, Washington Post gave it a bad review, New York Times gave it a great review. So it was about 50-50, really. But nobody mentioned the other 50 of the good ones. So the story comes over here that it was critically damned by everyone. And a news thing I was on the other evening, they strung together the 5 worst criticisms and didn't show any of the good ones, because it's a better story. But So consequently, you know, the story has become that the critics have damned it. So it is nice for the people to like it. It was never aimed at the critics. You know, I think a film that's aimed at the critics would have to be pretty heavy intellectual drama. Would have to match up to films like On the Waterfront, you know, and Casablanca. And there's not an awful lot of pictures around that get that. I mean, you look at Spielberg's reviews, they're terrible. Just saw one this morning for Gremlins. They're just terrible. It's as if he's a jerk, you know. Well, I know he isn't, you know he isn't, but they don't. Because to me, it's like in school. It's the teachers. It's an exam. And I never agreed what they had to say about me anyway. You know, it's an opinion, one man's opinion. So, yeah, I'm very pleased that, like, people are going to see it. In the States, too. It's been in the kind of top 20, 30 films for about 6 weeks. And, you know, there are some pictures get pulled after one day. So I'm just glad it's hung in there and done something, you know. And it's proving some of the critics wrong.
Which delights you, no doubt.
Definitely.
How was Broad Street conceived, though, Paul?
Originally, a long time ago, I was talking to the producer, Chris Thomas, a friend of mine. We were doing some work together. And Chris produced the Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks album. And I always liked the album, so I was talking to him about it one day. And he told me the story about how the fellow who was going to deliver the tapes of that album got waylaid somewhere and the tapes got misplaced. And he went there and they were all ringing each other saying, "You got the tapes?" He said, no, he's got them. No, I haven't got them. And they went missing. So we thought, like, you know, we were laughing about this and we were saying, "Oh, it'd be great, you know, if one of mine went missing. You see all the people in the office panicking, you know, and EMI ringing up, what? What's gone missing?" And all of that. So I thought it was a nice, simple idea, really, for something like this, because I didn't really want it to be too heavy a plot. That's my story now, anyway. No, it is true. We didn't really want it to be too heavy, because musicals traditionally don't really have heavy plots. Think of any musical you've ever seen. It's pretty simple, you know, Rags to Riches, or Gene Kelly comes from Ohio to New York. Yeah. Sees his name in lights. You know,
there's not so many songs in War and Peace, is there, really?
No, you know. So, I mean, the kind of film we were trying to make wasn't a musical-based film. So anyway, the plot was based on that Sex Pistols incident.
One of the scenes that sticks out in my mind from the film, Paul, is the ballroom sequence. How closely does that resemble your own teenage days?
It's like, you know, when you have a dream of something. It doesn't really resemble your day, because it gets things mixed up and it puts that there and it puts that from over there that really happened that week, puts it in the same week as this thing. So it jumbles things up, but it's all the ingredients. And that's what ballroom is. It's like, there always used to be a fight. Nearly always, every ballroom we used to play. So I remember being the band, as it is in the sequence from the film, at these ballrooms. There's a fight. There were always sort of older people wanting to do ballroom dancing. There were always these lovely big old ballrooms, which I love. But yeah, it's all my kind of, you know, memories from my childhood just muscled together.
You decided to do the vocals live, didn't you? Which kind of staggered me, because it's not usual, is it, for feature films of that magnitude to actually take on something as complicated and difficult?
Yeah, no, for some reason, which I still haven't discovered, I think it's just a technical reason, films nearly always work to playback. Traditionally, they always do. But I used to get annoyed, as did the other fellas in the Beatles, when you'd see a guitar solo and the guitarist would be playing right up at the high end of his instrument. It should have been sounding, but actually it's coming up, and anyone who knows guitar can say, he's not really playing. And it spoils it, because he's a great player. And it was only because technically they couldn't marry his vision with his audio. And it always just seemed so old-fashioned, that idea, you know, that I just said to the director, well, look, if we do nothing else with this picture, let's get the guitarist's fingers right. Let's make it. And when the drummer hits them, let there be a sound. Because it normally is kind of, boom. Yes. That's Ringo. He's always saying that, Hard Day's Night, boom, boom,
missing the
boom,
beat.
boom. He always does that. Yeah, any film you watch. So it was great. It was pretty hard work. You know, it meant we had to work a long time on the soundtrack. But I think the end result, at least when Chris Spedding plays his solo, it's him really playing, you know. I think that's valuable.
You mentioned Chris Spedding there, Paul, and of course there were a lot of other big names in the film as well, people like Dave Edmunds, Eric Stewart, and of course not forgetting Ringo. Was it just a question of inviting the boys round, or was it something a bit more serious than that?
No, I mean, in the script, there was a band rehearsing. That's really all it was. And I don't have a regular band. So it was guesswork, really. I knew that I wanted to work with Ringo, because we're comfortable together. And I knew he would agree to being in the film. Whereas George, for instance, doesn't really like acting. He's happier producing behind the camera. So I knew Ringo would be in on drums. And then I'd done bits and pieces of work with Dave Edmunds, but I didn't know him too well. But I just knew I liked him, knew he was my kind of musician, I knew I liked his records. And I'd seen Spedding work with Brian Ferry once, and I've known him a little bit, really. So I really just took a risk and pulled that little bunch of people together and just thought, it'll work. And it did. It was lucky. In fact, we spent most of the week just jamming. Okay. We had a lot of fun. Actually, a lot of it didn't get captured, you know, because got to reload magazines and stuff. But the great thing with people like Edmunds and Spedding is that they know all the rock and roll solos there are to be known. So if I start up with Bebop-A-Lula, Ringo knows the drumming, I know the bass part, Spedding knows the chords, and Edmunds, and he does the solo. So it was great, you know, it's good fun.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You worked very closely, Paul, with producer George Martin on the film, and of course you and he go back a long way with regards to the Beatles material as well. But will you be working with him again in the future?
George, I like working with George a lot. I've got a feeling, I mean, it's not official this, but I've got a feeling he may not do much more producing. I think he's starting to think that maybe he's done enough, because he's had a long career. He did a lot before the Beatles. A lot of people don't know, but George was involved in the Goons, Peter Sellers, Sophia Loren, all that stuff. He goes back quite a long way. we make fun of him, you know. We'd say he goes back to the Cylinder, if you ask me. But he doesn't go back quite that far. Well, he does go back to the days when, to make a record, the engineer used to have to telephone the conductor. The conductor would be waiting. And they'd put the wax, it was all made there and then, like hot wax. They'd start the machine, and he'd ring him up. Go! And the guy, and then right at the end of the thing, that was it. So George actually remembers those days, you know, so he does go back a long way. He doesn't like to admit it. But I think he's seeing a lot of young producers come in, and he feels like he's done an awful lot of good work. And I think he now is maybe going to go into film scores more than producing. So that may mean that I don't work with him again on the production thing. But I hope to work with him again, maybe on scoring. Because we had a good time on Broad Street, scoring all the music. It was very interesting for me. He's done it before, you know, and he's a very technical musician. He knows music technically. I'm the opposite, as were the Beatles. We're instinctive musicians. I still can't write music. I never learned. I tried to. Millions of times, you know, when I was a little kid, I hated it, you know, there was no beat, you know, I wanted, you know, I learned a couple of those things, you know, so there was no looking back. You learn a few little bopping riffs, you know. So I could never learn to do that, but George is brilliant at that. So he's a big help on all that kind of thing. So it's great, some of the music that's to write. And hearing it played by a big orchestra, it's a special feeling, you know, when you hear your tunes, and they're really cracking musicians. So that was a nice opening, and I would hope to do more of that with George, even if he doesn't produce.
You also worked with the late, great Sir Ralph Richardson on the film. It must have been a tremendous experience for you, because I know a lot of people working in the film industry think he's a great loss.
Yeah. Yes, the director wanted Sir Ralph, or Ralph, as he preferred to become called. He wanted him in the picture because he thought he had a twinkle in his eye, you know, he always had a twinkle. And we were looking at old school British actors for this certain little sequence in the film. The publican who's in that. And I agreed that Ralph would be the perfect choice just because of this twinkle. He's got a warmth. So the director asked him if he wanted to do it, showed him the script, he liked it and he wanted to do it. And he came along and he was just fabulous. It was really great, because I was a bit nervous. You know, somebody like that who's really, I mean, you've got your own idols, you know, and you just sort of think someone like that you've seen since you were a little kid. I was a bit in awe of him. But he really did make it very simple, and it was really easy acting with him. It was all over, you know, a matter of days kind of thing. And I went up to him afterwards and I sort of said, look, you know, because I'd asked him beforehand, I said, if you want to change any of the script, feel free, you know, this ain't Shakespeare, you know what I mean, we can change this. Because it wasn't so precious, I'm not precious about it. And he said, no, we'll do it just as it is. So we did it just as it was. And at the end of it, I said, well, I hope that was okay, you know, and no bother on the screenplay and all that script. He said, no, dear boy, he said, not a comma out of place. So that was like, that did it for me, of course, you know. That was great. He was really great, man.
Hello?
Hello, Jim.
Oh, it's you. What are you doing here? Clubbing, are we?
I know you might have caught the acting bug off him slightly because you have been talking in one or two places about maybe trying one or two roles yourself. Has anything happened in that direction yet?
Well, you know, I mean, I like acting. Being in music, you're an actor. Going in videos these days, it's involved. You know, even to get up and sing a song, it's acting of some form. It's musical comedy, I suppose. But, so, you know, I've done it in Hard Day's Night, Help, and in various bits and pieces through the years. So I like it. But it doesn't really mean I want to just become an actor. I mean, I like the idea of doing it, but I prefer music. I think I'm better at music than acting. But it's a challenge, and it's something different for me, which is nice. After you've done music for 20 years, probably the worst thing about it is you can get a bit bored. You can just think, oh, I'm doing this, I've done this forever now. So if you get something different, you know, like learning some lines and then do your music, it does bring a new edge to it, gets you interested. So that, I was very interested to do that. But I'm not really going around looking for roles, except maybe cheese ones.
So you've got an increasingly successful feature film under your belt, Paul, and of course there's the Frog song, which is going to be quite successful over Christmas, I think. But what does the immediate future hold?
Well, I've really just finished this phase where I've finished promoting the film. So I've been doing a lot of interviews and stuff. People are sick of the sight of my face now. Now I get a bit of time off, take it easy for Christmas, and I'm writing some stuff, which is like a hobby, really, writing for me. You know, I enjoy doing it. And I've been writing some stuff just with Eric Stewart, 10cc, who's a friend. And yesterday and last week I was doing some writing. So we're writing some stuff for a new album, you know, all new stuff. So I'll probably be doing that in the new year. And I'm looking forward to that, because I haven't made a lot of new songs. There's only 3 in the new film. It was mainly re-recordings of older songs. So I'm looking forward to doing some new stuff. And I was doing some work with David Foster, who's a producer, a Canadian producer. And we did a couple of tracks, which I'll finish off with him. So I'm doing bits and pieces for a new album, and then going to put my feet up for Christmas, hopefully.
Well, you're the world's most successful composer ever, Paul, if the Guinness Book of Records is to be believed. And some people might be tempted to think that it's been wine and roses all the way, but I'm sure that other things have happened along the way as well. If you could change one thing in your life, Paul, what would it be?
Well, if you could have everything, I think I'd be the same as a lot of people in my position, which would be that fame didn't bring with it lack of privacy. It's an impossible fantasy, mind you, and I do know that. I don't seriously want it, but if I could change one thing, it would be to also have a completely private life where no one really recognised me. Maybe to be able to take this head off, like Wurzel Gummidge, and put on another head for private moments. But that was probably what I would have. In actual fact, it's not really bad for me. But if I could have anything, I would have that just perfect, so that I never have to bother. But in actual fact, you know, I do a lot of things like that. And it's strange because people seem to understand. It's funny, you know, you hear, well, you know, you get famous now through the programme, and you know, sort of, But even you finding it, you know, that like people, hey, do you want to come up and talk a little bit about music? And they're not as bad as they're made out, people, most of them. It's like just seeing a friend. Sometimes it's really nice, you know, you're sitting there, nothing to do, and someone comes up. So, I say I have quite good fun with all of that. But I suppose if it made me change something, it might be that.
Paul, thanks a lot.
Okay.